have such an eminent panel of guests this morning on a subject called Navigating the Future. Actually, Saurav's book, which is Negotiating the New Normal, this book is also available here. This was the trigger for this session. Although we'll not keep the session confined to the book, we'll talk about general directions of our economy, Indian economy in particular, and in general, we'll talk about the global economy also. So Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, as we all know, he's an Indian economist and a very, very popular historian. History author also. He's a member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister. Earlier, he had a very, very active role to take out 6 editions of India's economic survey, which comes before the budget. He has represented India in G7 as well as OECD meetings. Recently, he was appointed the Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics in Pune. And he's written several books, as I said, on history with excellent reviews. He's a graduate undergrad degree he has from Sriram College in economics from Sriram College of Commerce, University of Delhi. And also an undergrad degree from University of Oxford at the St. John's College. He's also a Rhodes Scholar and had his master's also in economics. He has been the principal economic advisor in India. And so I'm really proud, the kind of pedigree you have, and also your family history of coming from the family of freedom fighters. When I look at people like you, it's my faith in the government that gets reinforced. That if they care for talent, if they care to have people in very, very eminent roles, with your kind of background. Thank you, Sanjeev, for being here. Saurav Jha, as I just told you, is the author of this book called Negotiating the New Normal. He has been an author, and also a commentator on geostrategic affairs. He's trained in economics at the Presidency College, Calcutta, and later did his master's degree from JNU, Delhi. He has been an energy economist and a consultant to FICCI as well. His first book was the upside down book of nuclear power. And I'm told at the Department of Atomic Energy, Government of India, there's a standard text for those who, for those who have to do some awareness building in the nuclear science, In 2015, actually, he co-published, along with his lady wife, a book called The Heat and Dust Project. This is on a backpacking trip the two of them did on a razor-thin, very, very tight budget in major parts of the country. And yesterday night, we were discussing, it's a very, very interesting book. So sort of sometime perhaps we'll have a session just around that book. And a lot of us would get ideas for tourism at a very, very tight budget, Later in 2017, he founded a think tank in defense space, which dabbles in the areas of defense technology, war, and the related ideas. His latest book, as I said, is Negotiating the New Normal, How India Must Grow in a Pandemic-Ridden World. It was written in the year 2022. So I think Saurav's book, if I have read more than half of it, still not completed it. Few points which emerge loud and clear in the book are that he talks about, in the post-pandemic world, the economic recovery in the developed world, in the global north, remains highly doubtful. He talks about, free market reforms giving way to some kind of economic nationalism all over the world. China, he talks about as the world's second largest economy. We all know the path that they've chosen for themselves. He talks about, can India become the new China in terms of the new growth engine for the world, and especially in the manufacturing sector. He also speaks about, geo-economic climate, where central banks in most countries, are actually running out of answers. They don't have answers. And the governments, country after country, their borrowings are going up. They are highly in huge amount of debt. And they're desperate to show their performance, and they're desperately looking for some silver bullets here and there. Job losses, as per Saurav, what happened during pandemic, we have still not gravitated back to the pre-pandemic level in terms of, there has been post-pandemic, there have been, despite the economy is bouncing back, but the job losses have come back to some extent, but yet not fully. He talks about post-COVID, how Industry 4.0 technologies would get accelerated, as companies would try all over the world to cut down on their costs and get higher productivity, which is alarming because it may result into more job losses going forward. And also he talks about China's relative slowdown, their economy slowdown, and the leadership crisis we've all seen in last 10 years or so in the US. This perhaps would give rise to some kind of a new world order. So this is largely what he talks about. But my first question, sort of to you, is more on, I'm a bit actually surprised, because if you look at India's history in last 75 years, the most transformative reforms which have happened were Dr. Manmohan Singh as the finance minister, all the reform that happened in early 90s, and that have changed the course of our economy in last 30-35 years. If you look at 33 years at least, there has been an average growth of GDP growth of 7% plus. So why are you saying that you are not in favor of big ticket macroeconomic reforms, Saurav?
I'm not in. It's not that I'm a priori or per se against macroeconomic reform, but I'm against macroeconomic shocks, right? And the reason for that is, in my view, if you see the latest research, you'll see that shocks tend to push countries down from the growth path that they were on earlier, prior to the shock, right? So every country is on a potential growth path. Now, when we say potential growth, what do we mean by that? Potential growth is basically the maximum sustainable output without, say, inflation rearing its head in an economy. So now the thing is that every economy is on a potential growth path. But what happens is, when you give a shock to the economy and there is a recession, the economic capabilities of the said economy could well, sort of degrade considerably and push you onto a lower growth path. How does that happen? Obviously, when you have a recessionary shock, there'll be a number of firms that will go out of business. Attendant to that would be job losses. So you would have basically the factors of production drop out of the economy, both in terms of capital employed and labor employed. And you may also have larger productivity problems, depending on what has gone out of the mix. So what is it? You were on this growth path. You suddenly fall onto this growth path. Now, in opposition to what standard business cycle theory used to say earlier, there is no V-shaped recovery. You don't just climb back onto the old growth path again. You basically just go along the lower growth path and you reach the same level of output. But your potential growth going into the projected in the future is definitely diminished. And this is one of the main reasons why there has been no convergence, so-called convergence, in terms of real per capita GDP between the West and the rest, except a few, if you keep aside a few examples like South Korea, etc. In general, because what has happened is all those other countries have been subject to macroeconomic shocks, especially the newly decolonized countries of Africa, the older countries of South America. At one time, Argentina had a higher per capita income than the United States. But then a whole century of instability put paid to that. It had 45,000 kilometers of railways in the 1940s itself. So what has happened there is, each time there's a shock, they fall onto lower paths. Whereas the West, because of its so-called wealth and the fact that it has incumbency in the world order, using the right mix of fiscal and monetary policies, it has managed to prevent that implosion. The last time that implosion really happened was in 1929, during the Great Depression in the West. That's right. And ever since that, it's been a never again policy for the West. So even during the pandemic, what you saw massive, not just the typical monetary easing that you saw during the so-called decade of the central bank prior, with unconventional policies being used. Unconventional policies in layman's term would be what they will say money printing. It's not so simple. It's not really money printing. It's the central bank basically expanding its own balance sheet and pushing the benchmark interest rates in the economy down to the zero lower bound or effective lower bound, as might be the case. And of course, also giving forward guidance that we are going to be in this state of monetary easing for a long time to come. So those policies, plus you saw a huge fiscal impetus being given to the economy. Now, this is something that the other economies of the world were not able to give to the same measure, the way the United States has given it. This is not how, say, Kenya was able to give it. And right now you're faced with a huge, Although, the Western world is obviously debt-ridden and the debt to GDP ratios are not sustainable, especially if you project it far into the future in terms of what are called A liabilities, in the sense of atypical liabilities which are not accounted for, unaccounted liabilities. Those are way off the count. The situation is much worse for countries in the so-called global south, post-pandemic. So the thing is that all of this means
they never had the economic muscle.
They never had the economic muscle to begin with. They never had the geopolitical muscle to begin with either, right? So there is a historical path dependency to where they are at right now.
So thank you, Saurabh, well articulated. Not that I agree with whatever you said 100%, and that's not the idea anyway in a panel discussion. So over to you, Dr. Sanjeev Sanyal. China we all talk about, and somehow I get a feeling we in our country we've not learned lessons from China. And whenever you compare and talk about looking at their best practices, we say, oh, we are a democracy, they are not. We have a free press, relatively free press. They don't have. We have an independent judiciary. They don't have. And we fail to learn. But if you look at post-pandemic supply chains, as more and more MNCs are trying to relocate those supply chains, and India comes at the forefront of being considered as a country. And some supply chains we did attract also. Those investments are seeing the light of the day now. But the whole issue is those investments have not come to India to an extent they should have come, because we were the country number one to be the right place for those investments to come in, those supply chains to be relocated to. But the whole issue with, and even in this year's economic survey, somewhere it says that the one issue is that Indian economy is not integrated with the Chinese manufacturing supply chains right now. If that was the case, if that existed in the pre-pandemic period, perhaps that the country would have seen a windfall of FDI coming to it through those supply chains, part of them getting relocated, or expansions happening not in China but they coming to India. So what's your take on that? That's what do you see a case for a greater economic cooperation between India and China, a greater integration of our economy with that of China, and a greater integration of our manufacturing supply chains with that of China? You see there's the case for that?
So let me first begin by saying, and I'll take on from where Saurav says. See, I'll take his point even further. There is no such thing, in my view, as a trajectory growth rate at all. All growth is earned. You have to earn by continuously upgrading your economy and by managing the macro economy, even when you get a massive shock, by not overextending your fiscal, monetary, and other things. Now, that does mean that you may have to take a lot of criticism for being disciplined during the shock periods, like we were in the case of COVID. But on the other hand, in the longer run, it definitely pays off, and our recovery has been much stronger. But that does not mean that we don't have to keep doing reforms. And for example, you just met, can't we learn something from China? Yes, there's many things to learn from China. Now the excuse is, oh, we are different from China. Yes, but that's merely an excuse for doing different kinds of reforms. And as some of you may be already aware, I am a big proponent of not just big structural reforms, but of run-of-the-mill process reforms, small reforms, rule number 43C, subsection D type of reforms. There are literally thousands of them need to be done. I myself been involved in doing scores, if not hundreds, of these small reforms.
And those reforms irritate the industry the most.
Absolutely. So that is what has to be done. In fact, the DOG that Elon Musk is supposed to now run along with Ramaswamy, we have actually been doing those kinds of reforms now for a few years. So from about the COVID period, I have personally been involved in that effort. And they have huge benefits. Now, the question is, in that context, as we reform our economy, we are generating growth. There's no doubt about it. The question that you raised is, how do we engage with China? Now,
economically, I mean, setting aside the geopolitical.
No, there is no separation between all of this. They're all the same thing. Now, the first thing is, we cannot wish them away. They are there. They're a major source of any input you want. And if you want to be a part of the global supply chain, we will have no choice but to deal with them. Now, the tricky part here is, if you're going to engage with them, then either you can take a call that you allow them to manufacture some stuff here rather than import it. And that is what the economic survey also roughly states. But of course, at the same time, it is true the Chinese are very, very predatory. Okay. So the balancing between them is no easy task. And of course, it waxes and wanes according to what the geopolitical conditions are. Now, one major thing that we have to take into account, which will happen presumably with President Trump comes into office, will be what is the kind of tariff structure he imposes on the rest of the world, and what is the differential between what he does for China and everybody else. So, yeah. So let me take it that as the hypothetical situation. Let's say he does 60% on China, 20% on everybody else. On balance, it can potentially be a very good for India. Yes, for two reasons. First is, of course, the tariff increases are less on us, so therefore we are more competitive than Chinese imports. That, in my view, is the smaller benefit. What will happen is, as the US attempts to manufacture many of these things onshore, in an environment where they're also pushing out illegal workers, etc., their job market will very, very quickly tighten. And they will begin to get inflationary pressures. Obviously, if you put 60% import duty on stuff from China, which is your biggest trading partner, prices will rise. So how do you counterbalance this? The only way they can counterbalance this is to outsource the service component of their production processes. Who is the biggest potential beneficiary of that?
India, of course.
India. So what I'm trying to say is that if Trump goes down that path, and we have no idea what exactly he will do. So I'm just, don't quote me on this because I also don't have any idea what he will do. But let's say he does what he's saying he's going to do. We could potentially benefit by basically taking on all the services activities that America will have no choice but to outsource to somebody else. And we are very well placed for that. Even in the case of manufacturing, in theory, we may be able to benefit by taking some market share away as well. But let me tell you where comes the tricky part. How he then introduces the rules, what kinds of rules of origin he imposes, etc., will now get very complicated. It was much different from what the others were doing. The others had a plan, no COVID policy or Swedish model, herd immunity. Different countries went.
Correct.
We basically did by iteration. The same thing we did with the oil price spike. We created a unique solution which involved us importing Russian oil. So, responding with flexibility, in my view, counts for more than having grand plans.
Absolutely. Yeah, the agility the system should have.
Agile system will beat a highly planned and highly sort of tuned system.
Absolutely. Very, very well answered, Sanjeev. And so I think... and I really appreciate, in pandemic, how the Prime Minister saw reforms as an opportunity. And the Finance Minister, I think in 3 spurts, she announced some major 5 spurts, major reforms, So rather than getting, languishing about COVID having happened, that the government saw as an opportunity to reform big time, that was really commendable. My next question is to Saurav. So I think... while talking about China, you somehow do not appear to be optimistic. Whatever part of the book I have read, that's a feeling I get. You said that they are focused too much on high-tech manufacturing and chosen areas of manufacturing would lead them eventually the Japan way. Their economy would go the Japan way. And one reason you give is that barely 38% of their GDP is for domestic consumption. Rest is for export and other stuff, kind of a thing. So, while their growth rate has fallen, but still remains one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and they still remain as on date of the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. So, could I know a little more about the reasons of you not being very upbeat about China?
See, the thing is that they've obviously the kind of scale they've reached in various manufacturing sectors is unprecedented, right? They captured 33% by value of global manufacturing. 33% of global manufacturing is in China at the moment, right? We are a top 5 manufacturer as well, but we pale in comparison to them naturally. We are
largest?
Well, fifth or sixth, depending on how the exchange rates move, because this is a nominal calculation. So sometimes South Korea is ahead of us, maybe, but I don't see that happening in the future. I think going forward into the 2030s, India will be in the top three, but still a distant third compared to the United States and China. Now the thing is that when you look at the state of affairs in China, and I have gone into a lot of detail on this in the book, because before China, I go into the history of Japan's economic history since the time of the Meiji Restoration, right? And the path they have taken, because that is the standard bearer of what used to be called the East Asian model, driven by investments and exports, essentially. So the problem with that model is it gives you breathtaking growth maybe if you do it properly, if your society is disciplined, you invest in R&D concurrently with your, as you know, you start getting investment from abroad, or you start getting tied into supply chains, and also you get markets abroad. You see, before when Deng Xiaoping opened up China in the 80s, after getting the MFN status from America in 1979, the main investors in those SEZs on the eastern coast were actually the Japanese and Taiwanese, and East Asian Chinese from Malaysia and other places. So ethnic Southeast Asian Chinese populations. So anyway, the point is that the thing is that this model can can bring you to the productivity frontier in various sectors, but then it ends up keeping you there. Okay, again, the historical path dependency matters over here. Japan, even today, has not been able to get out of the automotive sector properly, despite wanting to do so. Right? And they are not, and what has happened to them, they are now stuck with old technology. They're not being able to compete with the Chinese on the EV front, which is where, the demand is shifting. And the entire automotive sector itself is shifting. So what happens is the Chinese are over-invested, so to speak. And because they are over-invested, what you see is that the multiplier, the what is called the credit multiplier. Suppose you put in $1 of credit, the amount of output you get out of that is actually zero, according to the IMF, according to 2-3 papers at the IMF. So they are over-invested in various sectors. There is no scope for any further productivity improvement there. Right? Manufacturing, as is always the case, becomes capital intensive over time. And there have been 2 phases in which the Chinese have lost a lot of manufacturing jobs, by the way. They gave up on a lot of SOEs. The first tranche of SOE retrenchment happened in the 2000s. But what happened was, at that time, China had just joined the WTO and its manufacturing sector was rising. So the sons of many of the people who were retrenched over there found jobs. But the retrenchment that is happening now, you see, they have what the Chinese have very cleverly done is they have relabeled, or rather, they have reorganized the way they calculate unemployment. Like in America, you have U3, U6, and all. So now they have some 200 million people who are now being called flexibly employed in China. Right, and anecdotally also, even if you visit China, or you see even say things on social media, you will find that they have allowed a whole bunch of petty hawkers and petty sellers to come back onto the streets of their shining cities. So, there's an employment problem there. An employment problem always means a demand problem, an aggregate demand problem ultimately. So the Chinese are in no position to keep driving growth by simply over-investing in sectors where there is no productivity growth anymore and trying to tap global markets in a climate when it's not so simple anymore. This is where the economic nationalism part comes in. Right? You have reshoring, you have friendshoring, you have that whole geopolitical, the sort of what the United States, the kind of understanding the United States and the China and the PRC came to take on the Soviet Union. That entire geopolitical construct is now giving way to something else now, right? So the prospects, and on top of that, you have demographic decline in China. So you have demographic decline, you have overinvestment in key sectors, you have an inability to rebalance to consumption, and all of these obviously are part of that story, why you are unable to rebalance to consumption. So what is going to drive growth in China then? Nothing is going to drive growth. What is going to happen instead is you're going to see a pileup of debt, which you are seeing. In terms of overall debt, China is ahead of the United States in terms of debt to GDP ratio, overall debt. Because see, what they did very cleverly when the GFC hit and their exports started falling by 20% a month, it's not the central government which came in with transparent spending. they created these local government financial vehicles, okay, these off-the-books entities.
Correct.
Then nobody was very clear whether these are backed, whether they have a sovereign guarantee or not. And those were the ones which, in the period between 2008 and 13, those were the ones which led all kinds of investment in interior China. Counties had airports, and the gleam, and all those ghost cities that you saw, and the attendant infrastructure to service those ghost cities were built during that period. But the point is that what I'm saying is it's the same thing. You end up over invested in key sectors, then you rely on the real estate sector both to absorb blue collar slack and also to service the overcapacity that you have in steel, cement, and a whole bunch of other sectors. And that is where, because of insufficient financial development and social security, that is where your middle class ends up putting all its money. So you have a situation where there's demographic decline, real estate prices are falling, are being showed up only with monetary easing. You have things like Evergrande going kaput. You get the picture. There is a demand failure problem in China.
Correct.
Right. So, which is why I don't see. So, like Japan in the 80s, I'll tell you an interesting story. In 1987, at the footsteps of Capitol Hill, 3 Republican congressmen smashed the Toshiba radio, okay, with a sledgehammer. Why did they do so? Because it had just come out that Toshiba had supplied these 5-axis machine tools to the Soviet Union. And Kongsberg of Norway had supplied the software to use that, early software of the 80s, so CNC machines. That allowed a quantum jump, not a quantum jump, but a very significant jump in Soviet quietening capability for their submarines, for submarine propellers. So this was a time when a new so-called yellow pedal was, had gripped America in the late 80s. And the thing was that was a violation of what is called the Coordinating Committee, or what used to be called the Coordinating Committee of Multilateral Exports, right? Control of multilateral exports, and Japan was party to that, being under the US security umbrella, and so was Norway, and it was a violation of that. So you're seeing a de facto COCOM coming into place against China also. So in the two apex sectors of manufacturing, semiconductors and jet engines, you're going to see intense technology denial against China going forward. Absolutely. So even if they lead in 87 out of 111 technologies according to ASPI or somebody else, it doesn't really mean that much. Japan was also leading in the 80s and early 90s.
No, absolutely, Saurav. And one more thing, if I may add, China also has to realize at some point of time that what is the economic value add their manufacturing does to that country. For example, iPhones, Apple iPhones, more than half of the global requirement is met by China itself. But for every iPhone manufactured in China, the economic value add happening to China, I'm told, is just about $10. And for every iPhone manufactured in China, the economic value add happening in the US is about $35 to $65, depending upon which model,
See,
so that's also an issue, right?
So that's a good point. Of course, that has improved over time, by the way. It's not as low as that anymore.
I see.
Yeah, it's not that low because they have also, because of the supply chain over there, the value capture has improved over time. And that is what we are also planning for with PLI and trying to reach scale and stuff like that.
That's right.
And with the new specs, we are in fact going to give $5 billion in new incentives to deepen the supply chain.
Good.
But the larger problem over there is that the Chinese realize that what matters in manufacturing ultimately is design control. Okay, standard setting. So they, apart from the Made in China 2025, they have a Made in China Standards 2035 also. But the moment they go there, that is when the West really pushes back. The West will push back the moment they think somebody is going to climb the value chain very fast and is going to set standards. The Japanese set standards in certain industries. That's all right. But we know what has happened to Japan, which has been seen lost decade after lost decade. And central bank and decades of the central bank, because they are the pioneers of QE in the modern era, right? Of large-scale asset purchases. So the Chinese have also entered that. PBOC has also entered what are called money printing policies already, by the way, de facto. So they're not calling it quantitative easing because they're never transparent about what they do anyway. They usually use other names.
You don't get to know the full story. No, thank you. Very well explained. Next question over to you, Mr. Sanyal. I think one thing which I really appreciate about the Prime Minister Modi is that the way he has tried to evangelize the cause for India to emerge as a developed country by the year 2047, which no other prime minister has ever done. But whole thing is, we are right now such a distant cry from what a developed nation should be. If you look at some of our numbers, if you look at our Human Development Index ranking, which is about 134th, if you look at the per capita income, we are ranked 129 by nominal GDP. And slightly better if you go by purchasing power parity. Hunger index, we are again more than 100, 105 is our rank. We've improved because of free ration and things like this. So my question to you is, as a very, very senior person of the government of India and being on the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. So what is the roadmap? What are the components if you really want to take a quantum leap for that vision of the Prime Minister to see the light of the day?
So let me first say I agree with that. First with Saurav on the point that there is a danger. Nothing is set in stone. There is a danger that China will become the modern day 21st century Japan and get stuck in a sort of way. There is an opportunity for us in that sense to catch up. Demographics and many other things do fall in place. Now, before we get too carried away by these indices, let me point out to you, and I have written extensively on them, much of it is basically used for mind control. If you look at the methodology of many of these, it's mostly garbage. I mean, the hunger index, for example, doesn't even stand up to a class 12 student's scrutiny. It's that bad. Oh. It's that pathetic. So much so, and I've written about this for several years, just day before yesterday, the World Bank finally accepted that there is a serious problem with these indices. And the World Governance Indicator, which, by the way, is an umbrella for many of these smaller indicators, is now being completely revamped. I've tweeted about it this last night. Please look into it. So the World Bank also has accepted that much of what they were doing was garbage.
Fallacy in that.
No, it's garbage. And the funny thing was the World Bank was publishing all of this on its website with a small disclaimer at the bottom that it doesn't take ownership of it, that World Governance Indicators basically had been outsourced to two random
disclaimer.
Two random external economists who were not accountable to anyone. So I raised this issue for several years. Others joined me, and just day before yesterday, they finally issued a thing that they're going to revamp the whole thing, and finally they're going to take control of this.
So I completely agree.
So just putting aside these,
but still we need to move up the value chain.
No, that I agree with you. But don't ever quote me these, because I mean they're worse than toilet paper.
I see.
Okay, I mean literally, I could explain the problems with all these indices to a 12-year-old, or maybe they'll discover it by themselves. They're that pathetic. Now wait. Now that does not mean that we don't need to grow fast.
That's right.
So now comes the issue, how do we? Now, many people will tell me, this is our per capita income, how do we get there? Let me tell you that everybody forgets the power of compounding. In 1990, India and China had roughly the same per capita income. Their economy is slightly bigger, their population was bigger, but not off the charts. It's the same order of magnitude. Then they grew by about 2.5 percentage points faster than us. That is it. And they were the fastest growing major economy in the world. We were the second fastest.
That's right.
But just the gap has meant that they've gone somewhere totally different from where we are. Now that compounding also works in reverse. It's arithmetic. We are now growing by the same differential above them that they have over the last 30 years. That's so right. We are growing at about 6.5, 7.5, that kind of range. They are growing at 4.5. Okay. So it's a matter of us compounding. So never forget the power of compounding.
Absolutely.
Okay, we were only $280 billion economy in 1990. It took us 16 odd years till 2007 to become a $1 trillion economy. Okay, then it took us another 6 years to become a 2 trillion economy. Okay, then it should have taken us about 4 or 5 years, but then we got hit by COVID. So it's taken us another 6 years odd into 2022, finally crossed 3. Now this year we will cross 4. But very quickly in some 24 odd months, we will cross 5. And that's when we will go past both Germany and Japan. So never underestimate the power of compounding. Yes. And I do not like all these diversionary things by NRI economists. Do this scheme here, that scheme there, divert fiscal resources, all kinds of nonsense. This is about growth. If you grow, you'll create the jobs, our per capita income will rise.
Completely
Okay,
agree.
so Norway's or Sweden and all these countries where you say, oh, their human capital index, etc., is very good. None of them use basic income. They did not create various kinds of revenue schemes. They basically increase their per capita income. Being rich is good. It doesn't buy you love, but it does buy you almost everything else on human development indicator. Okay, so the point is we have to focus on growth and keep growing. That generates the resources. Yes, some amount of you do need to do certain amount of redistribution, but never by ever jeopardizing the growth engine. Even within our own country,
Sure.
it is blatantly obvious.
Sure.
I mean, look at my home state, Bengal. Okay, in 1960, it had a per capita income that was 30% higher than the national average. And it was the second or third largest, it was the third largest economy. UP was the largest economy in 1960 because agriculturally, Maharashtra, and then it was West Bengal.
Not
West-
Tamil Nadu.
Not Tamil Nadu was fourth maybe. I have written a paper on this just about a month and a half ago. Today, West Bengal is not in the game in anything. Okay, its per capita income is some 25% below national average. It's in fact got a per capita income which is now below that of Odisha. I mean, not even getting involved in other countries. It's below that of Odisha. One of the lowest in the country. It only looks good next to Bihar, which is even poorer. So, getting growth going is important.
Absolutely.
And that requires ease of doing business. It requires physical infrastructure. It needs being serious about global supply chains in whatever way we want to engage with it, but we have to engage with it. And we have to eventually move up the value chain in terms of technology. Whether it's big emphasis, for example, that I've personally been involved in getting a patenting system going. But even here, let me show you how reforms really do make a difference. Okay. 6 or 7 years ago, India used to not even give out 10,000 patents a year. Then we began to reform it. Okay. As I said, I was personally involved in smoothing out the process, hiring more people into this. In the last financial year, we have crossed 1 lakh.
Wow.
So it's in 6 years, a 10-fold increase in the number of patents
Commendable.
granted. Absolutely. In fact, now our problem is we are giving out more patents than the applications flowing in. So we are clearing up the backlog. But now we will, unless people in the audience go, hopefully some of you will be trying to patent, I don't know. But I'm encouraging everybody to patent because now I'm creating a patenting machine that is huge and we don't have enough applications coming in from our own scientists. But, I'm just telling you that don't worry about catching up with all these statistics. Compounding is very powerful and we can perform very, very well. But it requires single-mindedly going for growth and not getting diverted into these silly conversations which a bunch of NRI economists try to propound.
No, absolutely. So I think it brings me to another question, Mr. Sanyal. If this developed nation by the 2047, if that has to become a reality, there's some other. You talked about innovation, right? But the fact is, we are still not an economy which is driven by innovation. If you look at our R&D spend, science and technology R&D spend, which is just about 0.69% of our GDP. If you look at our education, the public expenditure on education, state and federal government put together, it's about a little over 3%. Healthcare, a little over 2%. So and this is roughly half or even lesser than other G20 countries, even the BRICS, most of the BRICS.
So let me
again
tell you.
So what's the roadmap on that?
Roadmap here is first we have to open up the channels for innovation. As I said, one was to get our patenting system into some reasonable shape. But ultimately, very importantly, the bulk of innovation does not get done in government labs anywhere in the world.
It happens.
It has to happen in private sector. Now, the problem is our private sector does not have a culture of R&D. So, for example, we are the world's pharmacy. Everybody agrees we are, supplying the world with medicines. Now, our generics manufacturers are not small companies. They are large companies by global standards. Yet, they have mentally stuck themselves into continuously doing generics. How much new molecule discovery do? We don't. Look at the abysmally small R&D budgets of even our largest companies. Big talk from Tata's on, we also make steel, but this is basically an NGO view of doing industry.
valid.
No. So we need to get serious. Look at the biggest group in, let's say, Elon Musk or Zuckerberg or Google or whoever these guys are. Look at the amount of R&D do even in India. And this whole story, Indian scientists are not good enough, is basically rubbish. Much of this research is being done even in the West by our scientists, and not even in the West. They are happening in GCCs in India.
Microsoft.
All of them are doing. Google Maps is an Indian invention done in Hyderabad, Google office. So we have the capability of doing serious research. Our guys are more than good enough. We don't need this great increase in engineers to do this. We have adequate to do it for now. We need a culture of doing this. So whenever I make this point where I go to, say, for example, I go to CII, FICCI or these kinds of things, and I make this point, the titans of industry will try and divert the conversation to some CSR project they are doing with weavers in some remote district.
This doesn't happen through the CSR route.
It doesn't. So we got to be serious about this. This is not some charity we are doing in research. We got to be serious about research and development, innovation, and so on. And we've got to get out of the mindset that every upgrade in technology is about having some collaboration with some Gora company. We have now crossed that path. The Chinese crossed that path somewhere in the late 90s. We are crossing that path now. And if Indian companies cannot do it, they should make space for new entrepreneurs coming up, startups coming up. So this whole approach, by the way, we are also make steel. We are actually a charity which, very apologetically attempts to do some business. That entire approach of the old business has got to go. We got to get serious about innovation and competitiveness.
Thank you. Thank you for such a lucid and a proper explanation. I'm shown that card. The time is up, but can I get 5 more minutes because we started late also. Amitabh, is that okay? All right. Okay. So quick. 1 or 2 questions. All right. So maybe we could have a rapid fire kind of a thing. Maybe a rapid fire would not be the Karan Johar kind of a rapid fire. We'll do that. So just a quick one. I've read something about what you've been talking about. Maybe in one line, ship making industry. Why are you so upbeat on that?
Upbeat or not, it's an imperative. I'll just tell you a little bit about the shipbuilding industry. China builds 46% of the world's ships. Then between Korea and Japan, they build another almost 40%. So 95% of the world's ships are built by 3 countries in East Asia. We build less than 1%. Now, this is a major economic and geostrategic risk. First, 95% of our goods, trade, and imports of energy, all of this is done on foreign ships. We are paying almost $100 billion in payouts for hiring these ships and shipping related costs. Now, that is not only it's an economic cost, it's a geostrategic cost. Just imagine if someday 3 or 4 major global shipping lines decide they don't like us, we'll be in real trouble. So we need to build our own ships. Can we build our own ships? Absolutely. We are one of the few countries in the world that actually built an aircraft carrier or nuclear subs. We have the demographics. Shipbuilding is completely a young man's business.
It's an employment.
It's a huge employment generator, and it's a young man's business. Okay, it's mostly about climbing up and down and welding. We have a long coastline. We have our own. So why haven't we done it? Well, because we have this landlocked view of what it is. We need to make ships listed as infrastructure. We need to introduce it into SARFAESI Act. We need to give it huge amount of financing. We need to create shipbuilding yards, give them orders, change our rules of ownership and flagging. And we could be a major world power in shipping very quickly. I would say within a decade, we could be a major shipping power.
Very small question. I looked at your recent op-ed. You've talked about that why, while we discuss FTAs with countries, there's so much of focus on visas going up and so on and so forth. And this, stops us from having adequate leverage for discussing issues which are far more crucial for our economy.
So this is the point I'm making. As we become in the next 24 months the world's 3rd largest economy, we need to begin behaving like we are the world's 3rd largest economy. So when we negotiate, why are we negotiating for visas, long-term visas? Business visas are good enough for going back and forth. IT industry, you've got to be kidding me. This is the one industry that should be able to work from home. And home can be India.
And offshore leverage is so high there.
Yeah, and why are we negotiating with another group on something that's politically difficult there, when we can make a lot of other things that we can get from that same point. By giving that up, we can make many other things which will be useful to resident Indians. This is good, maybe useful to NRIs. Why are we negotiating for them?
Thank you. And two very, very quick, you don't seem to be too upbeat on FTA. What is the reason? Just a one-liner. We were running out of time.
Our experience with FTAs is nothing great. And the rules of origin, if you can't negotiate a proper rules of origin, an FTA means nothing. We were worried about, whether America will penalize us for being a conduit to China. Suppose we were part of RCEP or something. The FTA we did with ASEAN, that basically led to the erosion of our supply chain.
And RCEP, you are again not in favor of India joining, becoming a part of RCEP.
RCEP will be a de facto FTA with China at a time.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
totally. I am against joining RCEP.
RCEP will be a de facto FTA with China at a time when there's going to be serious trade diversion from China unless they can find a new outlet because of Trump's putatively speaking, the kind of tariffs he might put. And so if we are going to benefit for any of that trade diversion, any of that friendshoring, because America won't be able to reshore because they just don't have the cost structure, even with cheap energy. They will have to friendshore. And if you are part of RCEP, then they will not friendshore to you, right? And
so Saurav, one last very, very quick one. Yesterday we were talking about it that you've talked about India being, UP being the most populous state, and we need mega industrial manufacturing parks. Would like to expand on that?
Yes, I see. I am of the view that UP has the highest potential going forward. Okay, people don't understand what they have. There are these observers. They say, "Oh, it's a large unwieldy state." No, it's because it has a significant chunk of the Gangetic Basin under a single administrative unit. It has actually great potential going forward for a diversified economy, and especially for diversifying towards manufacturing. On one end, you have this huge regional hub called the NCR. On the other end, you have these extremely rich resource regions like Sonbhadra, etc. Okay, where you have hydropower as well, which, by the way, has one of the highest energy return on energy investments, which matters at a fundamental level for growth. I am completely a votary of growth as well, okay, because without growth has been found to be the single most important factor in removing debilitating poverty. There's no doubt about this.
Good.
You have to make the pie bigger.
Thank you. We are running out of time, but we can have two maybe audience questions if there are any. And if the question is directed at a particular panelist, you have to say that. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Good morning, Abhivardhan from ICL. I have a question because you wrote a paper on complex adaptive systems and you talk about
this.
Yes, and absolutely. So, looking at the work of the Union government as of now, what is one of the best examples of complex adaptivity where the government has been doing pretty much, if you can exemplify?
Okay, so the main point about complex systems framework of thinking, in case others don't understand it, basically it stops thinking of the economy as a machine and thinks of it as like a wobbly system, like a weather system. Now, one of the points about this is that, of course, because complex adaptive systems are so heavily get impacted by butterfly effects and unintended consequences, one of the points I was making earlier, flexibility always trumps grand plans. Okay, so that's why we got rid of the 5-year plan. We got rid of even the planning commission. The thinking, therefore, for example, during COVID, we used an iterative process as opposed to having a clear view where we were going. Now, while we were going through this, everybody criticized us, why do you keep changing your policy? Well, the whole point about an iterative approach is that you will be willing to do this even in the face of some criticism that you will get. So the key point of many things can be done. I can give you a long lecture on this. But one obvious thing is that we are far more open to a feedback loop-based iterative correction of policy than would have been the case in some other framework.
Thank you. Any more question?
Sir, thank you. Thank you for the lecture. So, you have spoken about the R&D part. At the same time, we read about the teaching shift which is our past history. So do you think the opportunity to, go through the history and whatever invention already been done, but which is not recognized, we can work upon them to, flourish in future?
The Stitch Ship project is to create a sense of history and a sense of the risk-taking behavior our ancestors used to have. It has nothing to do with the specific technology of stitching. I'm not attempting to revive stitch ships as some, serious way to ship containers around the world. What I am trying, however, to do is to break us away from this inward-looking closed idea that, Indians, didn't cross the seas because of some caste rules of Kala Pani, all that. Most of which is utter nonsense. There's more than adequate evidence of thousands of years of maritime explorations done by Indians. And the way they used to do it is in ancient times through this ship called the Stitch Ship technology. I'm just recreating one ship to demonstrate how it used to be done. This particular ship that I'm building in Goa, we'll be trying to do a voyage to Oman and later to Indonesia, is merely to build a sense of adventure and sense of risk-taking and innovation.
And nostalgia.
Yeah, not nostalgia. Pride in risk-taking, a sense of risk-taking. No nostalgia. Nostalgia is what, people in Kolkata's coffee house do. This is, I'm not trying to go back to some past. I'm trying to merely demonstrate that ancient India, of which we are all very proud, was all about risk-taking, and they used to do this. As far as the shipbuilding, however, is concerned, we should be building super modern ships.
Absolutely. It would surely create a sense of pride, in what used to happen. Last question? Is there anybody who has?
I just want to know, like IIT Kanpur is going to have a hospital, a 500-bed hospital. And with that, are you planning to integrate pharmaceutical industry and instrument industry with that? Because in IIT Kanpur, if the hospital is being made, that is for the invention. So are there any plans to join pharmaceutical and instrument making industries? Thank you.
Well, the pharmaceutical sector will definitely find itself in that hospital. It's you're talking about medical devices, right? Where we need to work on medical devices. Yeah, so ideally that should be the case. We don't have the kind of industry academia integration that you need for going forward. Because of what was discussed earlier, the R&D spent by a private sector in any case poor. So the heavy lifting is done by the government. The only good thing is that it has been seen worldwide that public spending in R&D leads to a crowding in of private spending also. It has been observed in multiple geographies. There are papers to that effect. So obviously that's how it should be. If you are making a new hospital in IIT Kanpur, I can see IIT Kanpur's biotech department, for instance, finding a lot of room, place over there. But it should not only become a PhD production center. Okay, that has happened to some government institutions in the past also, where there's this principal agent guide student kind of framework, and they just keep churning out PhDs based on various, different kinds of considerations that may be at variance with what the government wants to do. So the focus should be on cutting edge research and on that IIT Kanpur place serving as a hub for other research centers in India as well. That is how, what I would propose if I were asked this question.
Thank you, Mr. Sanyal and Saurav, for being such wonderful panelists. It was hugely value-adding for each one of us, including me. We have taken, there's a time overrun of just 5 minutes. We started late. We have taken that time plus 5 minutes more. And thank you for your pearls of wisdom, both Saurav and Sanjeev. Thank you so much.